Now, never rate a field of ginseng like you would anything else. You have to use good common sense here, because I know of a man, bless his soul, because he needs the blessing. He goes into a ginseng field and digs up everything that's there, pulls out the big ones, and lets the rest of them die. This is a case for justifiable homicide, excuse me, but it's a sad thing to do. But all he's thinking about is the buck. He's after that dollar. And that type of an individual isn't very highly evolved. I do hope that some of the products that they produce might help other people.
Do you have preference for which ginseng is used?
There are a number of ginsengs. Now, some of them are highly ridiculed. Some of them are not. There's the Korean. The Korean is wonderful. There are a number of different named ginsengs. The one big problem we have with a lot of them is the fact that I know men who harvest ginseng here in the United States. I know them personally. They ship their ginseng to Korea, and it is bleached out and repackaged and shipped back in here at a price extremely higher than what it was when they shipped it out. This is usually actually the height of price they put on some of it. But some of the ginseng is actually good. Yes, I pay $248 for a little bottle of concentrate. Well, it's worth it because it is high quality. You only get what you pay for. We do have here in western United States an herb that has been misnomered. It's been called a ginseng. It is a sour root. It is a peculiar herb, but let me tell you a little secret about it. As much as it's been ridiculed, it's done an awfully lot of good, because I know of people who have used it and used it successfully. I know an old man that was given up for death when he was a young man, and he found this root and he used it, and he told other people to use it. The last time I talked to him, he was way up in years and doing very well. So don't be too critical, but I'll tell you this: your people who have done research on ginseng can give you good information and tell you the proper types to use. I'll tell you, too much ginseng is not good for you. So you've got to use your own body as a testing board. We have another herb here. I talked to you about Peruvian bark. Remember about quinine? Yes, Peruvian bark is one of our great aids to assist mankind to overcome some of the weaknesses that we have. But Peruvian bark is not from this area. We have other things that will do the same type of a job that are from closer home. I had been using white poplar bark for years with my patients. And when I found out that we were getting into some critical times and white poplar bark was hard to get, I wondered what I was going to do, because I was leaning on pretty heavy. The bark from the white poplar is very high in your, well, Aspen, Anison types, things of this, and it's good for fevers. And so one day I learned that white poplar, though it might be considered a scarcity, was quite well known around here by another name, and the name is Quaking Aspen. Now this is your Quaking Aspen vegetation. and the inner bark is great. My wife used to tell me how she used to love for spring to come. So all the vegetation and everything, and oh, spring was the new time of the year. But there's one thing she hated about spring, because every spring her dad gave them aspen bark tea, and he wasn't a bit stingy about making it strong. And they would have to stand up in line and each of them take their tablespoonful. And she said she dreaded spring because of the quick-and-ass bark. But she said, you know, an astounding thing was that all the kids up and down the area where we lived in Rockland had the snivels and coughs and colds, and those kids didn't have them. Right, it's a blood purifier and a tonic, and it tones up the system, and it's good for spring. And it assists us, instead of having spring fever, we can overcome it. Some people, though, we're a little worried about them because they get spring fever on the first day of January and it stays with them until the 29th of December. And they just don't get out and do much about it. The good Lord has been awfully kind to us when it comes to herbs to take care of spring fevers and things like this. He tells us that we are to use herbs in their natural state, wholesome herbs, and in the, get this, the season thereof. And oftentimes we wonder, what in the world does he mean when he says in the season thereof? Thereof, when you look it up in Webster's Unabridged, says in that place. So what have we got in that place? We have got vegetation growing. At that time, in that place, at that time, it is now spring. And as spring breaks loose, what comes up first? Certain little plants. And you know, we have found that those plants are extremely high in sulfur. They are loaded with sulfur. And what is sulfur for? Sulfur is a body cleanser. We have used sulfur diazole, we have used sulfur nilamide, we've used sulfur drugs of so many different types. We go down to the doctor and he says, you're not very perky, you better get some flowers of sulfur. And all of these things. All right, sulfanilamide is great, but they are an inorganic and they're not completely organic. But in our early spring plants that come up, we've got sulfur deluxe. There's plenty of it. Ask any lamb. Why does a lamb bounce around and is full of pep and energy, and some of us just go to sleep because it's too hard to get around? Well, that lamb has been getting lots of sulfur. So when we get our salads the first thing in the spring, we want to get some marshmallow in it. We want to get some beet greens. We want to get some young growth from many of our plants around because they're all high sulfur, higher than they'll ever be at any other time of the year. And it starts cleaning out our heavy winter bloodstream, which has made us so sluggish. And it gives us pep and energy. And with that pep and energy, we've got vitality. All right, that's the spring tonic. And we're talking about tonics. And that tonic is something that is needed by everybody. So don't miss your chlorophylls. Don't miss your spring vegetation. Don't miss your salads. When you do miss them, you are the ones that are susceptible for cysts and tumors and warts. You are in trouble. And so let's keep to our early spring things. And at the same time, everything in its season thereof. What comes in the spring? Strawberries and early raspberries and early fruits and early berries. And when we gather these, we've got something that has strength. But when the rush comes out and our cattails spring out in the spring, we've got a source there one of our finest foods. This is in the spring. When we first get our burdock roots in the spring, our first year's growth, they are potent, they are delicious, and they can be used by diabetics without any harm to them at all, because they are satisfying to the human body. All right, and all of these come in the spring that will sustain us. Now the season progresses along, and we're coming into summer. And in the summer, we have a different type of vegetation. We have a different type of fruit. In the late spring, we start in with our early types of apples, and as summer comes along, we have a different variety of apples, but they're a little more satisfying to us. Your yellow apple that comes off real early in the spring, your June apple, and these, sometimes they are so delicious, but they aren't quite as filling as they are that come out in the summertime. And we have such a large variety, but in the summertime, we get a lot of melons. We get a lot of cabbages and tubers and things of this type. And these are excellent for the summer. And in the season thereof, as the summer goes along, we will find out that our pears are a little more firm. Our apples are a little more firm. Our different types of foods are a little heavier. Why? They are preparing the body to take on a heavier bloodstream that can support us during chilled times, during colder times. Because if we have the same bloodstream that we have in the early spring, we're running into trouble. We'll chill to death. As summer goes along and progresses a little bit farther, and what I'm telling you now are the things of warning and advice to store up and be ready to use when the times come. And as fall leaves, we find that the fall air is a little more chilled. And so we have our potatoes, and we have our other tubers. We have a different type of fruit come on, and we have our fall melons, and we have our squashes and various things. And later in the fall, our winter squash come on, and our winter melons, and our winter pears, and our apples that'll last all winter long. They are a different type of an apple entirely. Also comes our grains in the fall, preparing us for our winter feed. Our grains, our fruits, our nuts, and we should be harvesting in the fall the very nuts and things because they are still in season. Anything is in season that hasn't started to deteriorate. And so as long as they are in a good crisp position, they are still edible and good. In the winter, we can live like kings and queens in the season thereof, because we've got our fruits, vegetables, grains, nuts, and seeds. And if we learn to store them properly and use our root cellars and use our storage areas, we can live the year around off of food in the season thereof. But there are times when we decide that maybe we had better do something in storing up. So we've got some additional time, some additional foods for the times when there isn't so much presentable during the times of drought. There are many ways to preserve our food, but we have found that one of the greatest ways in the world is dehydration. Dehydration doesn't sound as palatable as it really is, but it doesn't sound as nutritional as it really is. We have found that with herbs, fruits, vegetables that are properly dried and dehydrated, their vibration is as high within a very few points when they are reconstituted with distilled water as they were at the time they were freshly gathered. This is great, as when they were freshly gathered. But the steam distilled water, for some reason or other, plus a dehydrated, will bring it back to a high vibration. We've got here in our foods that are dehydrated something that will keep for long periods of time. We have some companies that have learned to pull the oxygen out and hermetically seal packages so that they still hold their high vibration years later. And folks, I do not believe in hoarding, but I do believe, being like the anti-sluggard, consider its ways and be wise, and store up, because we are all susceptible to running into hard times. But we don't just store up foods alone. You know, we could have an immense building stacked with dehydrated foods on both sides, clear to the ceiling, and just a hallway going down through. And what has happened? And we have water stored and everything. And so we feel very secure. And so here we are with nothing to worry about. But all of a sudden, while we've got food all around us, we've got digestion, or we've got pains here, or we've got pains there, the pancreas isn't working, the liver isn't working, the gizzard isn't working. We got lots of problems. And we are lost unless we know where to turn. And that's why I say we don't just store fruits, vegetables, grains, nuts, and seeds. We also store herbs and put them away. Now, as we have gone through this program in these couple of 3 days, we have told you some herbs that you know inside of you, as well as I know, that we shouldn't be without them. We should never be without them. And store them up. Store them up and get them hermetically sealed if you can, or store them up in tightly sealed cans with paraffin wax on them, or do something so that they will last a long time. Because when the critical times come, we can have food stacked around us, and if we're not able to eat, we're lost. So let's keep our bodies in perfect condition all the way. All the way. And what's our job in this very room? Our job, of course, is to get ourselves well. Me especially today, I'm thinking of. But we get ourselves well, and why? To tell other people and to pass that word along. You are the jewels. You are the ones that can gather around you many other people. For all these years that I have been lecturing, it is so thrilling to go into a city that I haven't been in years. And I'll find a club of people where they are lecturing and teaching, and I find that it's been one of my students. And in another city, another of my students. And what does that do? It means that the word is spreading. And what's spreading? Good health. And good health means long life and happiness. And happiness gives us peace. And what do we need more than anything right now? Peace, and lots of it. We have got nothing in this world but turmoil unless we turn to the inner side and see the people who are of the Aquarian age, who are in here fighting to keep peace going. The bark that I was speaking of to replace poplar bark, white poplar bark, is your aspen bark. Now, if you will go into these very hills where we are, you'll find aspen trees all around us. If you will watch for these, that inner bark is absolutely terrific. From the inner bark of the aspen, you can make the greatest aspirin tablets there ever was.
Dr. Christopher, on gathering this bark, how can you take it so you don't damage the tree?
When gathering your bark, I'm glad you asked this question, because in damaging a tree, that's called raping again. And so we take the bark and narrow strips, and we run it up and down. We never run around, because in running around, the sap is damaged, its flow is damaged. So take it out in areas and groups of little patches from the tree itself. It could be interesting again to some of you to know that your area here with your quake and aspen bark is good for something else. We have a young fellow from the Brigham Young University who learned that he could make maple syrup from quake and aspen. Only it isn't maple syrup, it's quake and aspen syrup, but we still call it the quake and the maple syrup deal. And it's just as sweet, and it's hard to tell the difference between them. So there is so much value. We've got right in our vegetation here value that is great. We have talked about a number of tonics, but let me now talk about what I think is one of the great tonics of all times. And this tonic is Brigham tea, also called the desert herb. It is called, as well as the desert herb, Mormon tea. It has a number of names. Who knows the botanical? Ephedra. And this particular herb, the ephedra, let's use it now as a tonic. And why does it work like it does? Your ephedra, I have used it now for, I guess, over 30 years. I've gone out and gathered it. And where do you gather it? Generally from real sneaky. I have gathered it from old mining areas. And there should be ephedra growing around here someplace. I haven't even had time to look. But over on the west end of Salt Lake Valley, out of the old mining towns there, you will find the ephedra. And I explained how it's a big old tree with just spikes going up with practically no leaves. It's an odd-looking thing, but your ephedra is equipped with about 10% organic copper. There's your key. Now, the organic copper works the same as your inner bark from your quake and aspen. It is an organic tonic, a copper tonic. Don't ever use inorganic copper under any condition. This is one of the most dangerous things because copper poisoning is severe. But organic copper is a great food.
What about those copper bracelets?
The copper bracelets, we're getting some protection because it has to be filtered through the skin. But my dad, the fellow that adopted me, bless his soul, he wore a copper bracelet on a wrist and on a, I guess it was the opposite foot. I just don't know.
It's for arthritis.
It's for arthritis. And the odd part about it, it sure helped him. He was able to get, come to think about it. Well, anyhow, copper. He was never without his copper bracelet on his arm and hand. But you're far better off by using your herbs that are high in copper. And this goes directly into the bloodstream. And as it goes directly in, it meets with the liquids, makes up its own tea, and leaches out dead inorganics and gets rid of our calciums and things of this type that are accepted into the body but not assimilated. Yes?
So then Brigham tea would be good for arthritis?
Brigham tea is one of the greats for arthritis. Yes. Now, for arthritis, right while we're on that subject, I should be able to speak authoritatively on it. Some of you know and some of you don't, so I'll repeat. From inherent weaknesses, my parents left me with rheumatoid arthritis. And when I was taken from the orphan's home at 14 months, I was crippled up with it. And I have suffered rheumatoid arthritis these 70 years, mild, moderate to severe. But it's never been less than mild, and I've always had pain with my arthritis. But I can never say that I can blame my parents for it. My dad was from Paris, France. My mother from Scotland. No, my mother was from Switzerland. France and Switzerland. And they had left me with a very bad body. But why did I choose them? Why did I come through them? Because I had a lesson to learn. That's why I am here. If it hadn't been for that arthritis, I'd have been a prosecuting attorney someplace, or I'd have been running for president someplace. I used to be quite an orator, and I had to be dropped down to where I was needed. And I was needed here because I agreed to be here before I ever dropped around this time around. I knew that there were things that I had to learn. Being as thick-headed and as bullheaded and as stupid as I am, some of these things have had to come through pretty hard. And I've had a hard time of learning them. But, you know, the interesting thing of the whole picture is I can't say to my mother and dad, who I don't remember at all, my blood parents, it was your fault that I am suffering arthritis today. No, I can say, bless your souls, I'm glad you were stupid enough to be sick so I could come through you, so I could learn these lessons that I'm learning now. Well, anybody who has a severe inherent problem will be a little different from other people. Now, the average individual have good days and bad days. Every 7 days, we go through cycles. There are 6 days of accumulating toxic poison. And we accumulate that toxic poison and we dump on the 7th. And that's why people say, oh no, Monday. Oh, I hate Monday. Or some people say, Saturday. I don't know why Saturday has to come around. I hate it. Each have their own day that they don't like. But this is that cycle a day. I never forget a fellow. He said, I don't think I'll ever forgive you. And I said, why? He said, well, you started me on my cleansing routine on a Saturday. And he said, well, you know, every Saturday, he said, I'm sick as a dog. And that's the only day I've got I can play golf. He said, I don't think I'll ever let you get away from being unforgiven. Well, yes.
Dr. Christopher, when does the 7-day cycle start? Does it start at birth or at the time that you start cleansing?
It's time you start cleansing. That's when the 7-day, and it can regulate back and forth according to the way we live or don't live. But then we have a 7-week cleanse, and that 7-week cleanse is one that we have to watch a little closer for. I tell a story about a couple that came to me from Murray, Utah, and an old gentleman. He was up around his 80s, and I warn everybody, every one of my patients, you're going to have these healing crises and these healing cycles, and you might as well expect them. If you don't warn them, they're going to flip when it comes. They're going to think, oh, what a scrutty doctor. boy, I was feeling pretty good up until I came to him, and now I feel awful. And there are so many of them that have thrown this out that a doctor sometimes wonders if they've missed the boat. They have missed the boat unless they warn people in advance. And so this old gentleman said, 7-week cycle. I guess I can handle that weekly cycle, but gee, I don't know about that 7-week stuff. What'll happen to me? Well, I said most people have colds or flu. They have some kind of an upset like that. But you know, as I looked at him, I said, well, these silly things again. You know what I think you're going to have? He said, no, what? I think you're going to have the mumps. He looked at me, and his wife looked at me, and they both laughed. He had mumps when he was a kid, you know. That sounds crazy. And I said, I don't know why it came out, but it just came out. 6 weeks passed, and they were taking their treatments regularly. And the beginning of the 7th week came, and a call came from Murray, Utah, and the lady said, hey, doctor, we won't be in today. And I said, oh, what's the matter? She says, my husband's sick. And she was laughing. And I said, well, what's to laugh about if your husband's sick? And you'd be sorry about it. Oh, she said, you told him a few weeks back that on his 7th week he was going to possibly come down with mumps. He's got them bilateral. He got them on both sides. And she says, it hurts for him to even smile, but he's over there chuckling now and suffering the pain. It's so funny. All right, that's your 7-week cycle. But you know what? That's pretty bad, sure. But wait till you have your 7-year cycle. And we who have come through people who have done their inorganic, or I mean well, they have left the weaknesses with us, sins of omission, sins of commission, and weakened our bodies down. And if we've been through 4 generations, sometimes it'll start on the 3rd, but on the 4th generation at least, by that 4th generation, you're going to have a 7-year cycle. And every 7 years like clockwork. And people say, oh, that's all in the mind. You're just thinking of this and it's going to come. Well, I wasn't thinking of it because I didn't know about it until I was 35. But all I had to do was trace back, and I found out that on my 7th year, I was out of school with rheumatoid arthritis. In my 14th year, I was out not only with rheumatoid arthritis, but I had heart trouble, and my eyes were bad, and my ears were so bad I had to sit up at the front of the class. I couldn't hear the teacher. In my 21st year, I was a very sick person, and I was out again. And this time, I had these other things, and added to it was hardening of the arteries. I had also hemorrhoids. I had stomach ulcers. These things, from time to time, accumulated, and they got worse and worse. Well, every 7 years, and I would go through severe times. I would be in the wheelchair for maybe 6 months, 9 months, 14 years old, up 14 months, 21. I was sitting there in the wheelchair so long. Only, excuse me, didn't have a wheelchair when I was 21, depression years. And they put a bunch of pillows for me to sit on. And I sat there for way over a year. In fact, I didn't know what else to do, and I had a lot of surplus paper around and a typewriter, and I typed